Frank had always been the sturdy oak in his family, a man of quiet strength, resilience, and unwavering love. The years had carved deep lines into his weathered face, each wrinkle telling a story of hard work, sacrifice, and the countless moments he had cherished with his wife and children. Now in his late 70s, Frank lived alone in the small house on Maple Lane that he had shared with his beloved Margaret for over 4 decades. The rooms, filled with memories, echoed with her laughter and the sounds of their life together. But now they felt hauntingly empty. As the sun began to rise, casting golden rays through the kitchen window, Frank shuffled through his morning routine with the meticulousness of someone who had learned to appreciate the small things in life. He brewed a pot of coffee, the rich aroma filling the air, and sat at the kitchen table, where countless family meals had once unfolded. He glanced at the photographs that adorned the walls, smiling faces frozen in time, reminders of birthday celebrations, graduations, and family vacations. His heart swelled with warmth, yet a shadow loomed over his thoughts. The ringing of his daughter Emma's phone call pierced the silence, jolting Frank from his reverie. He picked up the receiver, his heart racing with a mix of anticipation and dread. Emma had been busy with work and her own family, and he cherished their conversations, even if they were fleeting. Today, however, he could sense a heaviness in her voice as she spoke. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, her tone laced with concern. "I've been thinking about your care." Frank's heart sank. He had felt the change coming, the subtle shift in Emma's demeanor, the way she hesitated when they discussed his health, and the increasing frequency of her visits. "Emma, I'm fine. I don't need any help," he replied, trying to sound more convincing than he felt. "I can manage here at home." "Please, Dad," she implored, her voice cracking slightly. "You can't keep doing this alone. It's not safe." Frank's stomach twisted. The thought of a nursing home, of leaving his cherished space, sent chills down his spine. "No, Emma, I won't go. You have to believe me. I can take care of myself," he insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "I've been doing it for years." Emma sighed heavily, her silence betraying the conflict within her. Frank could almost hear her thoughts racing, the struggle between love and responsibility playing out behind her eyes. "I know you want to stay here, Dad, but I'm worried about you. You've fallen a couple of times, and the doctor thinks it's time for more support." "Support?" he interrupted, frustration boiling over. "You mean a nursing home? I've heard the stories. I won't let you do this to me. I don't want to be taken away from my home." His protest hung in the air like a thick fog, laden with fear and the weight of memories. Frank's home was not just a physical space. It was a sanctuary of love, a repository of his life's work and joys. The thought of relinquishing that to strangers was unfathomable. "Dad, please," Emma's voice trembled. "I just want what's best for you. It breaks my heart to see you struggling. I'm trying to find a way that keeps you safe, and I thought maybe we could look into some in-home care options." Frank felt a pang of betrayal mixed with despair. He knew in his heart that she meant well, but the idea of strangers coming into his sanctuary, disrupting the sacred space he shared with Margaret, was unbearable. "Emma, please don't take me away. I can't go to a place like that. I'll do better, I promise." Silence enveloped them, the tension palpable. Frank could hear his own heartbeat, the sound of his aging body betraying the strength he had once taken for granted. He closed his eyes, envisioning the walls of his home closing in around him. They were the walls that had seen laughter, tears, and endless love. He could not imagine living in a place where that history would be replaced by clinical coldness. As the days turned into weeks, the conversations between Frank and Emma grew more strained. Each time she visited, he felt the looming specter of the nursing home hovering in the background. The thought gnawed at him like a persistent ache. On some days, he could feel his resolve weakening, and the reality of his situation pressed heavily on his chest. Then came the day when Emma arrived with a box of his belongings from her childhood home, items she thought might bring him comfort. Among them was an old scrapbook filled with photographs and letters that captured fleeting moments of joy. As he flipped through the pages, he was transported back in time, the laughter of his children ringing in his ears, But nestled within the pages was a note written in Margaret's familiar handwriting. "Frank," it read, "no matter where life takes us, remember that home is where the heart is. It's where we find love, joy, and the memories that make us who we are." Tears blurred Frank's vision as he read those words, the weight of their shared history crashing down around him. He could hear Margaret's voice, feel her warmth enveloping him. In that moment, he realized he was not just fighting for his home. He was fighting for the essence of who he was: a father, a husband, a man who had loved fiercely. Desperate to keep his family intact, Frank summoned the courage to share a piece of his heart with Emma. "There's something you need to know," he said one evening, his voice shaking as he revealed the truth behind his fierce resistance to leaving home. He spoke of the deep-seated fear of losing not just his physical space, but the memories and the life he had built with Margaret. "I can't lose that, Emma. I can't lose her." Ash opened up. He saw the shift in Emma's expression, concern and love mixing together. But he also saw something else: heartbreak. She understood now. She saw that his plea was not just about his physical home, but about preserving the love and legacy that lingered within those walls. Frank's heart ached as he watched realization dawn on his daughter. The fear of a nursing home, the longing to stay rooted in the past, was something he could no longer carry alone. As Emma listened, her eyes glistening with tears, they both felt the weight of their journey. A journey filled with the complexities of love, loss, and the fierce desire to protect what truly mattered. In that moment, they both knew that the path forward would be fraught with challenges, but they would face them together, fortified by the bond of family and the memories that shaped their lives. The battle against time and change would not be easy, but for Frank and Emma, it was a fight worth undertaking. A journey toward understanding, compassion, and the hope of keeping their family's heart alive. Frank took a deep breath, steadying himself as he searched for the right words. The moment hung between them, heavy with unspoken fears and unexpressed love. He wanted to convey everything: the depth of his sorrow, the fierceness of his attachment to their home, and the weight of Margaret's memory that filled every corner of the house. "Emma, it's not just a building to me. It's where I've built my life, where I've loved your mother and raised you and your brother. Every creak of the floorboards tells a story. Every crack in the wall holds a memory. I can't just walk away from that." Emma's gaze softened as she listened, her heart aching for the man who had been her rock throughout her life. "Dad, I understand. I really do. But I can't watch you struggle anymore. It terrifies me to think of you being alone, especially when your health has been so unpredictable." She paused, searching for a way to bridge the chasm of fear that had formed between them. "What if we found someone who could help? Someone you trust?" Frank's heart sank at the thought of inviting someone into his sanctuary, someone who might disrupt the delicate balance he had fought so hard to maintain. "Trust is hard to come by these days, Emma. I don't want someone else's hands touching my life. I need to hold on to what I have left, to the way things used to be." The edge of his voice trembled, a mix of anger and sorrow swirling within him. "I know, Dad, but it's not safe for you to be alone. You've had too many close calls, and it's just too much for you to handle on your own," Emma pleaded, her own voice rising with the urgency of the situation. "Let me help you. Let me be there for you." He felt the swell of emotions: love, fear, and a fierce need to protect his memories and identity. "And what if I don't want help? What if I want to do this my way, even if it means struggling?" Frank shot back, the words escaping him before he could contain them. The vulnerability in his voice cracked, revealing the deep-seated fear that had taken root in his heart. Emma remained silent for a moment, taking in her father's pain. "Dad, it's not about you being weak. It's about us finding a way for you to be safe and happy," she finally responded, her tone softer now, almost like a lullaby. "You don't have to do this alone. We can find a solution that respects your wishes while keeping you secure. Please, let's talk about it." He could see the determination in her eyes, a reflection of the love they had always shared. Frank's heart ached with the realization that this was not just a battle of wills. It was about two people who cared deeply for one another, trying to navigate the murky waters of aging and loss. He wanted to fight, to stand his ground, but deep down, He feared what might happen if he refused to compromise. Days turned into a blur of conversations and visits, each filled with the echo of unspoken emotions. Frank found himself in a constant state of unease, torn between the desire to maintain control over his life and the nagging realization that he could no longer fully care for himself. Emma's visits became a blend of warmth and tension, each interaction marked by the weight of their unspoken agreement to find a way forward. One afternoon, while flipping through an old album filled with photographs, Frank stumbled upon a picture of himself and Margaret at a picnic, laughter etched across their faces. The sun was shining, and the world seemed perfect. He remembered the warmth of her hand in his, the way they had shared dreams of growing old together in their little house. It struck him like a bolt of lightning. He wasn't just clinging to memories of the past. He was also holding on to the promise of the future he had imagined with her. The thought filled him with both comfort and pain. "Dad," Emma's voice broke through his reverie, pulling him back to the present. She had entered the room quietly, as if sensing his need for space. "I've been thinking about what you said. Maybe we could look into in-home care that feels more like companionship. Someone who can help you with daily tasks, but also respect your space and independence." Frank looked at her, uncertainty dancing in his eyes. "You really think that could work? That someone would just come in here and respect what we have?" "I believe so. There are agencies that specialize in matching caregivers with clients based on compatibility. You could even interview them, make sure they understand how important this home is to you." Emma smiled softly, trying to reassure him. "It's not about taking you away from this place. It's about making sure you can stay here safely." As he pondered her suggestion, Frank felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. "I suppose that could work, if I had a say in it." He felt vulnerable even saying those words, but he also felt the weight of his struggles begin to lift, if only slightly. "Absolutely, Dad. It's your home, and your comfort is my top priority," Emma assured him, her eyes shining with a mix of determination and love. "Let's look into it together. I promise I'll be with you every step of the way." For the first time in weeks, Frank felt the tension in his chest ease. He nodded, feeling a surge of gratitude for Emma's unwavering support. "All right, let's give it a shot," he said, his voice steadying. "But I want to meet anyone who comes here, and I want to make sure they understand that this is my space." "Of course," Emma agreed enthusiastically. "We'll find someone who gets that. I promise." The days that followed were filled with renewed energy. Emma researched local agencies, reading reviews, and reaching out to potential caregivers. Frank found himself participating in the process, even relishing the thought of interviewing candidates. It felt good to have a hand in shaping his own care, to feel that glimmer of control return to his life. One bright Saturday afternoon, Emma brought home the first potential caregiver, a warm and kind-hearted woman named Clara. With her curly hair and infectious laugh, she immediately put Frank at ease. As they sat in the living room, sipping tea and sharing stories, Frank found himself laughing, something he hadn't done in what felt like ages. Clara had a way of drawing him out, making him feel heard and valued, rather than like a burden. Emma watched from the kitchen doorway, her heart swelling with relief. This was the connection she had hoped for, someone who understood not just the physical needs of her father, but also the emotional landscape that came with aging. Clara spoke of her own experiences caring for elderly clients, sharing anecdotes that made Frank smile. They discussed gardening, shared recipes, and even reminisced about old movies. As the afternoon wore on, Frank felt the walls of his home begin to shift, the space transforming from a place of fear into one of possibility. He glanced at Emma, who was busy cleaning up, her face alight with a mixture of hope and joy. This was what he had longed for, not just companionship, but a way to maintain the life he had built with Margaret, to honor her memory while still allowing himself to live fully. By the time Clara left that day, Frank felt a sense of relief wash over him. "I like her," he told Emma, the corners of his mouth lifting in a genuine smile. "I think I could get used to having her around." Emma's face lit up with joy. "I'm so glad, Dad. We can arrange for her to come a few days a week and see how it goes." As the weeks turned into months, Clara became a fixture in Frank's life. She was attentive and compassionate, never rushing him but also encouraging him to engage in activities that kept him active and connected to the world outside. They tended to the garden together, planting flowers that added bursts of color to the yard, reminiscent of the blooms Margaret had once nurtured with love. One crisp autumn morning, as the leaves fell in vibrant hues of red and gold, Frank found himself in the garden with Clara, reminiscing about the seasons he had shared with Margaret. She had a knack for making everything beautiful, he said, his voice soft and reflective. Every fall, she'd insist we plant more chrysanthemums, saying they were like little suns lighting up the world. Clara smiled gently, her eyes understanding. It sounds like she was an incredible woman. You have such beautiful memories, Frank. Let's keep that spirit alive. Frank felt a wave of gratitude wash over him, the walls of his home now infused with warmth and connection. Clara wasn't just a caregiver. She was a reminder that life could still be rich and fulfilling. And as he stood there, surrounded by the vibrant colors of the garden, he realized that perhaps he could embrace this new chapter of his life without letting go of the past. Yet, deep inside, a lingering fear remained. Despite the newfound happiness, Frank could not shake the unease about what the future might hold. Would this arrangement be enough? Would he still be able to remain in his beloved home as the years passed? As he contemplated these questions, he turned his gaze to the horizon, hoping that whatever lay ahead, he would have the strength to face it. As the leaves continued to fall, bringing a chill to the air, Frank and Emma navigated their new normal. They learned to balance the comfort of the past with the realities of the present, always keeping the lines of communication open. Emma was often there, and together they would reminisce about Margaret, sharing stories that made them laugh and cry in equal measure. Clara became not just a caregiver, but a friend to them both, helping to bridge the gap between Frank's past and present. Yet as winter approached, so did a creeping sense of dread. Frank noticed small changes in his body, an ache here, a stiffness there, reminders that time was still an unyielding force. He tried to ignore the signs, but deep down, he knew he had to face the reality of aging head-on. Each day that passed without incident felt like a small victory, but the unspoken fear of what could happen hung in the air. One evening, as snowflakes began to dance outside the window, Frank sat by the fire, a blanket draped across his lap. Emma was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, while Clara tidied up the kitchen. The warmth of the fire wrapped around him, but a chill ran down his spine. He took a deep breath, gathering the courage to voice his concerns. "Emma, can we talk?" he said, his voice steady but laced with a hint of trepidation. "Of course, Dad. What's on your mind?" She put her phone down, turning her full attention to him. "I've been thinking about what happens next. I mean, I'm grateful for Clara, but I know that I can't keep doing this forever. What if I get worse? What if I can't stay here?" The weight of his words hung heavily in the air, each syllable a reminder of the uncertainty that lay ahead. Emma's expression shifted, a mix of concern and understanding. "Dad, I want you to know that we'll face whatever comes together. You're not alone in this. We'll figure it out." Clara, who had been listening from the kitchen, approached them, her presence comforting. "Frank, it's important to talk about your feelings. Aging can bring a lot of uncertainty, but it doesn't mean you have to face it alone. We'll take it one step at a time." Frank nodded, feeling the warmth of their support, but still grappling with the fear that loomed over him. "I just don't want to become a burden. I want to maintain my dignity, my independence," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "You won't be a burden," Emma assured him, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "You're my dad. I love you, and I want to be there for you. That's what family is for." "And I'm here for you too," Clara added softly. "We can work together to make sure you have the support you need while keeping your independence intact. It's all about finding the right balance." Frank felt a flicker of hope, a reminder that he didn't have to face his fears alone. As the snow continued to fall outside, blanketing the world in a soft layer of white, he realized that while the future remained uncertain, he had a loving daughter and a compassionate caregiver who were willing to fight alongside him. He took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. "Thank you," he whispered, gratitude swelling in his chest. "I know this isn't easy for either of you, and I appreciate everything you're doing." Emma smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We're in this together, Dad. Always." And as they sat together, the fire crackling in the background, Frank felt a sense of warmth envelop him, not just from the flames, but from the knowledge that he was surrounded by love. In that moment, he understood that the path ahead might be challenging, but with Emma and Clara by his side, he could face whatever lay ahead with courage and grace. The winter months rolled on, each day blending into the next, marked by the rhythm of life that continued despite the cold. Frank found comfort in the routine Clara established: morning exercises to keep him limber, shared meals filled with laughter, and evenings spent reminiscing about days gone by. Yet, as spring approached and the snow began to melt, so too did the resolve that had helped Frank navigate his fears. He felt the weight of uncertainty creeping back, gnawing at the edges of his mind. Despite Clara's presence, he could not shake the feeling that he was on borrowed time. One sunny afternoon, as the first flowers began to bloom in the garden, Frank decided it was time to confront his fears head-on. "Emma," he called, his voice steady, "can we sit down and talk again?" She looked up from where she was pruning the roses, her brow furrowing with concern. "Of course, Dad. What's on your mind?" Frank gestured for her to join him on the porch, the fresh air invigorating. "I've been thinking a lot about the future. I know I'm getting older, and I want to make sure I'm making the right decisions for all of us. I don't want to wait until it's too late." Emma sat down beside him, her expression serious yet supportive. "I appreciate you bringing this up. What do you want to talk about?" He hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "I want to talk about making a plan, Emma. I want to be proactive about my care, not reactive. I need to know what options I have before things get worse." Emma nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "That makes sense, Dad. We can look into everything, continuing in home care, or even potential options if you need more support later on. It's important to have a plan." Frank felt a weight lift from his shoulders as he spoke. "I want to be involved in the decisions, to have a say in what happens to me. I don't want to be sidelined or feel like I'm being pushed into a corner." "Of course, Dad. Your voice matters, and we'll make sure it's heard," Emma reassured him, her hand resting on his. They spent the afternoon discussing various scenarios, exploring the different types of care that could be available if his needs changed. They talked about resources, support groups, and even legal matters regarding advance directives. It was a hard conversation, filled with moments of vulnerability, but Frank felt empowered to take charge of his future, determined to face the challenges head-on. As they wrapped up their discussion, Frank felt a sense of clarity settle over him. "Thank you, Emma. This means a lot to me," he said, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I know it's not easy for you to think about." Emma smiled softly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "You're my dad, and I'll always be here for you. We're in this together, no matter what." With renewed resolve, Frank faced the days ahead with a sense of purpose. He felt lighter, as if a burden had been lifted from his shoulders. The conversations he had with Emma empowered him, igniting a fire within that reminded him he still had a voice, still had the strength to shape his own destiny. Yet, as spring blossomed and life began to awaken around them, Frank remained acutely aware of the ticking clock. Despite the plans they had made and the support he had, the shadow of uncertainty loomed ever closer. He resolved to savor each moment, to cherish the beauty of the life he had built, and to embrace whatever came next with courage and grace. With Clara's help, he began to engage more with the community. They took walks through the neighborhood, stopping to admire the blooming flowers and greet familiar faces. Frank found himself enjoying these interactions, feeling more connected to the world around him. Clara would often encourage him to share stories about his life, and he reveled in the opportunity to pass on the lessons he had learned over the years. But as the seasons changed, so too did Frank's body. He began to notice subtle shifts, a slight tremor in his hands, a fatigue that lingered longer than it used to. He brushed them aside, attributing them to the natural effects of aging, but a deep-seated fear gnawed at him. The unpredictability of his health weighed heavily on his mind, making it difficult to fully enjoy the moments he had begun to embrace. One evening, as he sat with Emma and Clara at the dinner table, Sharing stories and laughter, he felt the tremor in his hand become more pronounced. He grasped his fork tightly, forcing himself to maintain control. But as he glanced at Clara, he caught the look of concern in her eyes, and the reality of his condition settled over him like a thick fog. Later that night, as he lay in bed, Frank couldn't shake the feeling of dread that enveloped him. He stared at the ceiling, his mind racing with thoughts of what might happen next. The conversations he had so bravely initiated earlier began to feel like an illusion, a way to mask the inevitability of decline. The following morning, as the sun streamed through the window, Frank woke with a newfound determination. He needed to address his fears, not just for himself but for Emma and Clara as well. He wanted them to understand what was at stake, to be open and honest about the journey ahead. "Emma," he called softly, his voice carrying a weight of urgency. She appeared in the doorway, her expression alert. "Can we talk?" "Of course, Dad. What's on your mind?" she asked, coming to sit beside him on the edge of the bed. "I need to be honest with you about how I've been feeling," he said, his heart racing. "I've noticed some changes, physical things that I can't ignore anymore. The tremors in my hands, the fatigue. I don't want to pretend everything is fine when it's not." Emma's eyes widened slightly, a mixture of concern and understanding washing over her face. "Thank you for telling me, Dad. It's important to acknowledge those things. Have you thought about talking to Clara, or even a doctor?" Frank nodded, his throat tightening. "I think it's time for a checkup. I want to know what's going on, so I can prepare myself for whatever is ahead." "It'll help you make an appointment," Emma said, her voice steady. "You don't have to do this alone. We'll face it together." Feeling a rush of gratitude, Frank reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you, Emma. I'm glad you're here." As they sat together, a sense of calm settled over him. He knew the path ahead would be challenging, but he was determined to face it head-on. With Emma and Clara by his side, he felt a sense of strength that he had thought was lost. Over the next few days, Frank began preparing for his appointment, allowing himself to process the weight of his feelings. He talked with Clara about his concerns, and she reassured him that facing his fears was a sign of strength, not weakness. Together, they created a plan for his appointment, and he felt the solidarity of their support envelop him. When the day of his appointment arrived, Frank felt a mixture of nerves and resolve. He and Emma made their way to the doctor's office, the familiar surroundings evoking a sense of comfort. The doctor greeted them warmly, and as they settled into the examination room, Frank felt a wave of vulnerability wash over him. "Frank, it's good to see you," the doctor said, studying him with a keen eye. "What brings you in today?" Frank took a deep breath, knowing this was a pivotal moment. "I've been noticing some changes in my health, tremors, fatigue. I want to understand what's happening and what I can do to manage it." The doctor nodded, his expression serious but compassionate. "It's great that you've come in to talk about it. Let's start with some basic tests and go from there." As the examination progressed, Frank felt a sense of clarity wash over him. He was taking control of his health, making choices that empowered him to face the reality of his situation. After the tests were complete, the doctor sat down with them, reviewing the results. "Frank, I can see that you've been under a lot of stress, which can definitely contribute to the tremors and fatigue. However, I'd like to run a few more tests to rule out any underlying issues." Frank nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. "I appreciate that, doctor. I just want to know what I'm dealing with." As they discussed the next steps, Frank felt a renewed sense of hope. He was no longer just a passive participant in his life. He was actively engaged in shaping his future. The conversation with the doctor solidified his resolve to embrace each moment, no matter how uncertain it may be. After the appointment, Frank and Emma returned home, a newfound sense of determination guiding their steps. "I'm proud of you, Dad," Emma said, her voice filled with warmth. "You took a big step today." "Thank you, Emma. I'm learning that facing my fears is the only way to truly live," Frank replied, a sense of purpose igniting within him. As the days passed, Frank continued to navigate the delicate balance between hope and uncertainty. He took proactive steps to maintain his health, engaging in light exercises and staying connected with Emma and Clara. They shared meals filled with laughter, reminiscing about the past while also building new memories together. Despite the challenges, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere of the house. Frank found solace in the knowledge that he was no longer alone, that he had the support of his loved ones as they faced the future together. The bond between them deepened, forged by the trials they had endured and the resilience they had discovered within themselves. But as spring turned into summer, the world around them burst into vibrant life, and with it, a new set of challenges began to emerge. Frank could no longer ignore the signs of aging, nor could he escape the reality that time was an unyielding force. The tremors in his hands became more pronounced, and the fatigue he had dismissed began to linger long into the day. One evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, Frank felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He struggled to keep his focus on the conversation, the laughter and joy of the moment becoming muffled in his mind. Emma noticed immediately, her brow furrowing with concern. "Dad, are you feeling okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," Frank replied, forcing a smile. "Just a bit tired, that's all." Clara watched him closely, her instincts sharpening. "It's important to listen to your body, Frank. If you're feeling worn out, don't hesitate to take a break." Frank felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He didn't want to be perceived as weak or burdensome, but the truth was becoming harder to ignore. He excused himself from the table, retreating to the living room to gather his thoughts. As he sat alone, the weight of reality settled heavily on his shoulders. He knew he needed to address his health openly, but the thought of burdening Emma and Clara filled him with dread. They had been his pillars of strength, and he didn't want to let them down. That night, as he lay in bed, Frank felt the isolation of his thoughts suffocating him. He stared at the ceiling, the silence amplifying his fears. Would he soon be a burden to his family? Would they see him as the frail man he feared becoming, rather than the strong father they had always known? The next day, determined to confront his emotions, Frank decided to have an honest conversation with Emma. "Emma, can we sit down for a moment?" he called out, his voice steady yet tinged with vulnerability. "Of course, Dad. What's going on?" she asked, joining him in the living room. "I need to talk to you about how I've been feeling lately," he said, his heart racing. "I've noticed that the tremors are getting worse, and I've been feeling so tired. I'm scared that I'm not going to be able to keep up with everything." Emma's expression shifted to one of concern, her eyes searching his face. "Thank you for telling me, Dad. It's important to be open about how you're feeling. Have you thought about seeing a specialist?" Frank nodded, feeling a rush of gratitude for her understanding. "I think it's time to address this head-on. I don't want to hide it anymore." Emma wrapped her arms around him, pulling him close. "You're not alone in this, Dad. We'll figure it out together, I promise." As they embraced, Frank felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had taken the first step toward facing the truth, and it felt liberating to share his fears with someone who truly cared. In the days that followed, Frank and Emma worked together to schedule appointments with specialists and gather resources to better understand his condition. With Clara's support, they began to explore new ways of managing Frank's health, incorporating strategies to help him cope with the challenges he faced. But as they delved deeper into the realities of aging and illness, Frank couldn't shake the nagging fear that shadowed him. Despite the love and support of his family, he felt the burden of his condition weighing heavily on his heart. One afternoon, while tending to the garden with Clara, Frank felt the tremors in his hands become more pronounced. "It's becoming harder to do this," he admitted, his voice tinged with frustration. Clara paused, her gaze softening. "Frank, it's okay to ask for help. You don't have to do everything alone. We can work together to adapt your routine." Frank sighed, the weight of his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "I just don't want to be a burden, Clara. I want to maintain my independence." "You are not a burden. You are a person with a rich life and a beautiful legacy. And it's okay to lean on the people who care about you," she said gently, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. As summer continued to unfold, Frank found solace in the connections he had forged with Emma and Clara. They spent afternoons together in the garden, sharing stories and laughter as they cultivated the blooms that surrounded them. And though the tremors persisted, he began to embrace the support that had become an integral part of his life. But deep inside, a flicker of sadness remained. He couldn't escape the reality that his body was changing, that the independence he so fiercely cherished was slipping through his fingers. He wanted to hold on to the man he had always been, the father and husband who had built a life filled with love and laughter. One evening, as they gathered around the dinner table, Frank felt a wave of nostalgia wash over him. The warmth of the meal and the sound of Emma's laughter filled the room, evoking memories of family dinners from years past. "I remember when you used to make that amazing lasagna, Dad," Emma said, her eyes sparkling with delight. "You always insisted on using fresh herbs from the garden." Frank smiled, feeling a surge of pride. "It was your mother's recipe. She always had a way of making everything taste better." As they reminisced, Frank felt a sense of purpose settle over him. He wanted to capture these moments, to create lasting memories that would transcend the uncertainty of the future. "Emma," he said, his voice steady, "let's create a family cookbook. I want to share my recipes and the stories behind them. It'll be something we can pass down." Emma's eyes lit up with excitement. "That's a wonderful idea, Dad. We can work on it together." As they discussed the project, Frank felt a renewed sense of determination. This would be his legacy, a way to hold on to the man he had always been, even as his body changed. In the weeks that followed, they immersed themselves in the cookbook project, gathering recipes and stories, laughter filling the house as they cooked together. Frank shared cherished memories with Emma, each recipe a piece of his history, a glimpse into the life he had built. But as they worked on the cookbook, Frank's condition continued to shift. The tremors became more pronounced, making it increasingly difficult to perform simple tasks. Despite his efforts to stay engaged, he felt the frustration mounting within him. One afternoon, while attempting to chop vegetables for their next recipe, the tremors intensified, causing the knife to slip from his grip. It clattered to the floor, and Frank felt a wave of humiliation wash over him. "Dad, are you okay?" Emma rushed into the kitchen, her expression filled with concern. "I'm fine," Frank said quickly, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "It's just frustrating." Emma knelt beside him, her eyes searching his face. "It's okay to feel frustrated. You're facing a lot, and it's natural to have those feelings. I just want to be the father you remember, not this version of myself," Frank admitted, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. "You are still the same person, Dad. Just because your body is changing doesn't mean you're any less you," Emma reassured him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Frank looked into her eyes, seeing the unwavering love and support reflected there. He took a deep breath, allowing the warmth of her words to wash over him. "I just wish I could do it all like I used to." "You're still doing so much, Dad. And we'll find a way to adapt together," Emma said softly. As they sat together on the kitchen floor, Frank realized that while he could not control the changes in his body, he could choose how to respond. With Emma's support, he could still share his stories, create lasting memories, and leave behind a legacy that honored the man he had always been. With renewed determination, Frank shifted his focus from what he had lost to what he still had. He embraced the help and support of his family, allowing them to be part of the journey instead of fighting against it alone. As summer transitioned into fall, the leaves began to turn vibrant shades of red and gold, mirroring the warmth that filled their home. They continued to work on the cookbook, gathering stories and laughter, the process becoming a balm for Frank's soul. Despite the challenges, he found joy in the little things, the feel of the sun on his face, the laughter shared around the dinner table, and the warmth of Emma and Clara's love. Each day became an opportunity to embrace the present, to savor the moments that mattered most. One crisp autumn afternoon, as they gathered in the living room, Frank felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He looked at Emma and Clara, their faces glowing with love and laughter. "You both mean the world to me," he said, his voice steady. "Thank you for being here through all of this." Emma smiled, her eyes shining. "We're a family, Dad. We'll always be here for you." Frank felt the truth of her words resonate deep within him. He realized that while he couldn't control the challenges that lay ahead, he could choose to face them with love and courage, surrounded by the people who mattered most. As the seasons continued to change, Frank found peace in the uncertainty. He embraced each day as a gift, cherishing the laughter, the memories, and the love that filled their home. And while the future remained unknown, he knew that with Emma and Clara by his side, he could navigate whatever lay ahead with grace and strength. As winter approached, the days grew shorter and colder, but within Frank's home, warmth emanated from the love shared between him, Emma, and Clara. They had dedicated their time to finalizing the family cookbook, turning what began as a project into a heartfelt journey that brought them closer than ever. The pages filled with recipes, stories, and photographs became a testament to their bond, a legacy that Frank cherished deeply. One evening, as they huddled around the kitchen table, the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg wafted through the air. Frank stirred a pot of apple cider on the stove, his hands shaking slightly as he poured the warm liquid into mugs. "Nothing says winter like homemade cider," he remarked, glancing at Emma and Clara, who were reviewing the final edits for the cookbook. Emma looked up, her eyes sparkling. "It's perfect, Dad. I can't wait to share this with everyone." Frank smiled, the warmth in his chest growing. "And to pass it down to future generations," he added, pride swelling in his heart. As they sipped their cider, the conversation flowed easily, stories from Frank's past mingling with plans for the future. But beneath the joy, a shadow lingered in Frank's mind. His health continued to deteriorate, and he could no longer ignore the weight of his condition. The tremors had become more pronounced, and fatigue was a constant companion. Yet, he was determined to focus on the present, to savor these moments of laughter and love. One snowy afternoon, as flakes danced outside the window, Frank sat down with Emma and Clara to discuss their next steps. "I think we need to plan a family gathering," he suggested, his voice steady. "I want to celebrate the cookbook and share it with everyone." Emma's face lit up. "That's a wonderful idea. We can invite the whole family, everyone who's been a part of our journey." Clara nodded enthusiastically. "It'll be a beautiful way to honor you, Dad, and the love that's gone into this book." Frank's heart swelled at their enthusiasm. "Let's make it a holiday celebration," he proposed, imagining the laughter and joy that would fill their home. "We can have everyone bring a dish from the cookbook." As they began planning, Frank felt a renewed sense of purpose. This gathering would be his chance to not only celebrate their efforts, but also to create lasting memories for his family. He wanted them to remember him as the vibrant man who had shared countless meals and stories, not just as someone who struggled with illness. In the weeks leading up to the celebration, Frank put forth every effort to ensure the gathering would be special. He arranged for the family to contribute their favorite recipes, each tied to a cherished memory. Emma and Clara helped coordinate the details, making sure everything would be perfect. On the day of the celebration, the house buzzed with excitement. The aroma of roasting meats and freshly baked bread filled the air, and laughter echoed through the halls. Frank welcomed each family member with open arms, their warmth enveloping him like a comforting blanket. As they gathered around the table, Frank couldn't help but feel overwhelmed by gratitude. He looked around at the faces of his loved ones, each one a reflection of the life he had built. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This means more to me than you can know." He paused, taking in the room, the clinking of glasses, the chatter of stories being shared, the joy radiating from every corner. "This cookbook represents our family, our love, and the memories we've created together. I want each of you to know how much you've enriched my life." Ash spoke. Tears welled in his eyes, but they were tears of joy. He felt a warmth within him, a sense of peace that wrapped around him like the embrace of his loved ones. After the meal, they gathered to share the recipes, each one sparking a memory or a laugh. Frank listened intently as his family recounted stories tied to the dishes, feeling a sense of fulfillment wash over him. This was his legacy, a tapestry woven from love, laughter, and cherished moments. But as the night wore on, Frank felt his energy waning. He watched as the festivities continued, a bittersweet ache in his chest. He knew he could no longer keep up with the vibrant life around him as he once did. Later that evening, as the last guests began to leave, Frank sought out Emma. He found her in the kitchen, cleaning up, her face glowing with happiness. "You did it, Dad. "It was an incredible night," she said, her voice filled with pride. "Thank you, Emma. I couldn't have done it without you and Clara," he replied, feeling a lump form in his throat. "I want you to know how much I love you both." Emma paused, her eyes searching his. "We love you too, Dad. You mean the world to us." In that moment, Frank felt the weight of his illness lift, replaced by the love that surrounded him. He realized that while his body may be failing him, the love he shared with his family would endure. It was a legacy that would carry on through the stories in their cookbook, in the memories they created, and in the hearts of those he cherished. As the last of the dishes were washed and dried, Frank took a moment to reflect. He had faced his fears, embraced his vulnerabilities, and shared his journey with the people who meant the most. He had fought against the tide of his condition, but in the end, he found peace in the connections he had nurtured. With a final glance around the cozy kitchen, Frank felt a sense of closure. He knew the road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it with love and courage, surrounded by those who would always stand by his side. In that warmth, he found solace, knowing that he would forever remain a part of their lives, even as they continued on without him. And as he climbed into bed that night, Frank closed his eyes with a heart full of love, comforted by the knowledge that his legacy would live on, woven into the fabric of their lives, a testament to the power of family, love, and the enduring spirit of hope.